Hey folks, this is Jackie Zoe with PolarStar Cybersecurity Group. This is going to be going into detail around phase 1 of your SOC 2 auditing journey. Phase 1 is all about scoping. So we're going to go into all the details associated with scoping. All right, so remember, it's about governance, not quality. So here are the different phases. And today we're going to talk about how you decide what you are going to assess. Important note, match your maturity. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk about the process of defining the systems that are going to be within scope, choosing the appropriate trust services criteria, selecting type 1 or type 2, and defining the audit period. So defining the systems in scope, it's important. If you have bad scoping, you have wasted audit dollars. So you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm going to give you as much guidance as I can to help you think through, right, what makes the most sense for you. The reason why defining scope is so important is because scope determines audit complexity, your evidence burden, and your control surface area. Now, the more mature you are, the better you are at dealing and handling with larger scope. If you have poor scoping, let's say you scope too much, then you're going to overload your engineering team who has other things and priorities they need to be working with. You create unnecessary audit findings that really don't materially matter to customer data and the business, and you also inflate compliance costs. The practical tip that I can offer is when defining scope, you want to be able to answer, where does your customer data flow? Where is it getting stored, and where is it getting processed? So one of the things that I want to really highlight is that if leadership alignment is quick, the scoping process can take as little as a week, right? But if there are scope debates, then that's when it drags 3+ weeks. It is important to have that executive sponsorship from your CEO and CFO because you're going to need the budget and you're going to need the whole organization to be behind you in making it happen. But at the same time, this is why having a dedicated owner to the scoping process and getting feedback from your executive sponsor is super helpful in this entire thing and kicking this thing off. So when defining systems in scope, you need to explicitly identify which systems, applications, infrastructure, data stores, and processes are included in that audit boundary. The clearer you are, right, the better time you're going to have in the audit process. Because here's what auditors are actually evaluating. Everything that is within scope has to have applicable controls. They have to produce evidence. They will be subject to sampling, and they must meet the trust services criteria that's selected. Everything that's outside of scope is not going to be tested. So the clearer you are about what's in scope, you will have your internal organization will know much better on what to do, and your auditors will as well. So it's just clear instruction. Clarity is great. What falls in scope will typically be the following things. So production applications, things like customer-facing, SaaS solutions or admin portals or APIs, if that's what you're in the business of doing. Infrastructure, so all the infrastructure typically supporting that production application. Supporting systems that, again, support that production application because that's where customer data sort of sits and is processed. So things like your identity providers, your ticketing systems, your CI/CD pipeline that create those products. And then, of course, the people and processes that make all of this stuff happen. So your engineering team, your security team, IT, HR, vendor management process. I'm going to highlight vendor management process because especially for those smaller companies, usually you don't have a formal vendor management process, but in order to show your maturity, you do have to have it because it is in a way a supply chain risk. So the fact that you have a process, right, shows that that is something that you can track and keep a pulse on. Not to say that you are, but you could if you have a process at least written down. What typically falls out of scope are going to be internal only sandbox environments like a marketing website, personal productivity tools. Think about Outlook, Gmail, maybe even your Salesforce instance, right? If it has nothing to do with processing customer data and of course non-customer data systems. Now these must be intentional out of scope systems though. So you got to explicitly be like, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're not looking at. And again, that clarity is helpful for everybody involved in this audit sort of journey. Now, how you determine scope is just remember it's a risk boundary statement. So, systems that materially impact customer data security, customer data availability, and customer data integrity is really what you need to be thinking about. And just find the appropriate balance. Now, if you have differing ideas, my recommendation is just to be like, this would be ideal, this would be good enough, this would be easy, right? And just figure out what that scope is, because we're not testing for quality. We're simply just testing, do you have what you say you'll do? And something to keep in mind is, what are your prospects looking for? What kind of assurance, trust do they need from you that they're hoping to get out of the SOC 2 report? Have those things in scope. So here's an example. If what is in scope is my production SaaS platform that's hosted in AWS, that's very broad, but this implies your AWS accounts, your identity access management controls, backup systems, so on and so forth, all these things. That's what it all implies. Here's an executive diagnostic question. You can feel free to take a screenshot, but to validate scope clarity, you want to ask the following questions. And if the answer is, I'm unsure, then the scope is not very stable. It's not very clear. And I'm going to walk through every single question in more detail so you can understand what it is you're trying to answer. So the first question, can we name every system storing customer data? If it can do the following to customer data, it is going to likely be in scope. You're going to want it to be in scope. If it can store it, if it can modify it, if it can delete it, or if it can expose it, you want to have that within scope. Do we know every path to production? So if a system can deploy or modify production, it's in scope, right? So you'll want to map the following: CI/CD systems, your Git repos, admin panels, right? Break glass accounts, things of that sort. If it can deploy or modify production, you want that in scope. And just think about it as a direct hop, not like hop and it touches it. Eventually, all roads lead to Rome, or all roads lead to production. But in this case, whatever is that immediate jump to that production is kind of what you want to keep within scope, at least in the beginning. Do we know every identity provider granting access? Do you have complete and controlled understanding of how users authenticate into the systems that you've defined or within scope? So what are all of the relevant identity planes? And more importantly, let's just say for offboarding, here's an easy way. What systems are triggered? What do you need to turn off if an employee were to leave or be offboarded? That's a helpful way to get started. And then, of course, do we know which vendors touch sensitive data? We are in a very connected world these days. Not everything is going to be your own code. So again, we don't need every SaaS tool listed. You really just want to segment your vendors by tiers using the following factors. Does it touch sensitive customer data, non-sensitive customer data? Is it transaction processing data? Think of something like a Stripe, right? That is likely a vendor you're going to want to have within scope, but then not necessary. Internal only. These are the different factors you just want to mark off, and then have like a rubric or a qualification guideline on what comes in and what goes out. Now, the reason why I provide this guidance is because sometimes there's something that maybe you think should go in, but you don't put it in because it doesn't necessarily qualify within your today's qualification sort of process. And that's okay, right? As long as you are doing what you're saying you're doing and you can track all of that and the decisions that are being made, you're actually in a really healthy place. Now, if you can't, that's when things start creating a snowball effect of pain internally. And here's a clean definition to reference on how to define systems in scope. So it is the formal identification of all systems, infrastructure, application, vendors, and processes that materially impact the trust services criteria. So whether it be security, availability, whatever, right, that is within your scope that you've chosen, that is what you're going to want to include. And therefore, those are all going to be subject to audit testing. So whatever is determined in scope, and that's a you call to make, it is free game come audit time. So it behooves you to be as clear as possible so that your organization, your team knows exactly what they need to go after to have an unqualified opinion around the audit. Again, pass, fail, right? I hate using that word because that's technically not what it is, but you get what I mean. So now, how do we choose the trust service criteria that makes sense for your business? What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to align this scope with your revenue risk. And what I mean by that is, what are your customers asking for, right? So remember, only one is required, and that is security. The others, however, are strategic decisions for your business, and I'm gonna break down how to make that decision for yourself, right? So here's a quick cheat sheet on when and if to include it. So when it comes to security, you have to do it. So we won't even talk about that. But for availability, if uptime commitments matter, include it. This is the most popular, let's call it add-on to the scope when it comes to trust service criteria. Processing integrity, if you're fintech or you're performing any sort of financial calculation, you're going to want to have it. It's what's going to open doors for you for bigger, badder, right? Prospects that have a whole lot more money to provide. Confidentiality, you want to include it if you do handle sensitive business data. This is the second most popular add-on behind availability. And then, of course, there's privacy. You want to include it if you process regulated personal data. Now, privacy, especially for first-time SOC 2 folks, I would stay away from this if possible because it adds on a whole lot more complexity. So for security, these are going to be the things that you're going to need to meet this trust service criteria. You're going to have things like access controls, change management, logging, early stage B2B SaaS. This is pretty sufficient. Now, reach out to us if you want to go into super crazy detail on what it is you need and don't need. But baseline, these are the things. If you have it today already, you're in a good place. For availability, you're going to want to have these baseline, right? A defined recovery time objective, recovery point objective, RTO, RPO, documented backups, incident response testing, monitoring discipline. And if uptime isn't contractually meaningful, who cares? You don't need it, don't add it. Processing integrity, right? Here are all those things, but if you're a solution that deals with payroll or billing, recommend. If you want to work with financial institutions, definitely recommend. Almost mandatory, really, if you want to be able to play in that space. Confidentiality, right? Here are those things, data classification controls, data retention, so on and so forth. And as you're seeing, as these things are building, hopefully you're starting to see that this is really more of a maturity model, and these criteria really signal that. And then, of course, privacy. Here are those items that you'll need baseline. Only choose it if it's commercially necessary because privacy is very complex, arguably. So choose it if you have to make money, but if you don't have to, I would pass on it. So here's a quick table if you need to show somebody, hey, here's how we choose what we need to choose. Now, type 1 or type 2, you have the option. So here's a comparison chart. Type 1, faster. Type 2, longer. However, type 1 is a weaker enterprise signal and it has a very short shelf life. Type 2, on the other hand, though it requires longer to do, it has a much stronger enterprise signal and it lasts a whole lot longer. It means a whole lot more. And enterprise companies are really expecting type 2, enterprise customers. So type 1 is good if you're seed or series A. People get it, you're just starting. But if you're Series B plus and you want to start showing we're here to play ball, that's really the area you want to be exploring. Here's another table for you to take a screenshot of, share it with your peers if SOC 2 is something that you guys are looking to invest in getting. So define the audit period. Fun fact, it's your choice to actually define that audit period. But you want to make sure you choose the right audit period. And that audit period, the way you should look at it, it is a stress test of your maturity. So the most common is if you're early stage, 3 months is likely what you're going to choose or want to choose. 6 months is more typical. 12 months is for mature organizations. Now, again, you can choose. So you might be asking, why not just choose 3 months? That's easier. Well, it's because when your enterprise prospects are reviewing your SOC 2 report, this is often an area in which they will look at first. When did you get the SOC 2 report? How long was it? And what are the exceptions on those reports? Those are the first 3 things that they're going to really quickly key in on. And they'll make their own decision on what that is. But put yourself in their shoes. Figure out, right, what you would feel more comfortable with in terms of engaging with a partner. So match your operational stamina. What you can do, just do that. Remember, again, it's not governance, or it is governance, and it's not quality. Auditors just want to know, does your system do what it claims to do? Were those commitments documented? And can you prove it? That's where the evidence comes in. And if you can't articulate what accurate processing looks like, then auditors can't test for it, right? So we're testing for accurate processing. We're not testing for good processing. Type 2 is all about consistency, and it has nothing to do with sophistication. So just remember that. So thank you guys. Again, we know what it takes. We're your partners in security. If you are looking to explore SOC 2 and getting audited so that you guys can get that report and share it with your prospects, reach out to us, because for us, it's not just a checkbox. We want you to do it correctly. And if this is an investment that you want to have be a operational sort of advantage for you, we're going to be the partners for you to get that going and lay those foundations. And we'll also share with you some of the trade-offs that you'll be making regarding certain shortcuts, and also recommend what makes the most sense for your maturity, given the resources that you have available. So, all right, thank you, and continue watching the rest of the series to learn more.